Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, March 18th, 2015, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday and another hopefully relaxing weekend, certainly more relaxing than the last one. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room along with a new trainee whose name I have not yet learned, and they will be twiddling the dials and keeping us out of trouble and answering the phones when you call on in. Quick reminder, in our third hour today, Michael Strizky of the Hydrogen House Project will be our on-air guest to talk about latest developments in this technology. So that's going to be very, very interesting. Obviously, the big news right now, it's been all over the media. Gunmen stormed a popular museum in Tunisia, and a lot of people killed and wounded. Two of the gunmen apparently shot, the others still at large. I'm running the egg timer to see how long it's going to be before they claim that this was all done by ISIS, because everybody knows that there's a significant military advantage to be had shooting up museums, right? And let's see, different reports, 8 dead, 11 dead. Somebody just sent me another one saying as many as 17 involved here. But again, why attack a museum? Whether it's the one in Tunisia or the one in Iraq, because it gets you publicity. This is a propaganda operation. When you're really at war with an indigenous government, there's no point to attacking a museum and killing people. It's headline grabbing. That's what they're doing. They're out there selling you that ISIS is this uber villain to get you to hate them so much that you will, without question, fling your money and the lives of your children onto any nation that the U.S. tells you ISIS is in. All righty. Now, obviously, big news coming out of Israel is that Benjamin Netanyahu did a surprise come-from-behind victory. They're still going through the process of forming a new coalition government, and it'll be between Likud and the Union Party. Now, one of the Arab parties actually came in third place, but something tells me they're not going to be invited to take part in the coalition whatsoever. And the media is out there saying that, the clear victory shows Netanyahu's scaremongering campaign was right all along. Or that Israeli elections are as crooked as those here in the United States of America. And the media is out there just, he deserves to be there. It's all going to be a good thing. Netanyahu bids to form right-wing Israeli coalition after decisive win. And it basically means nothing has really functionally changed except perhaps Netanyahu's sense of infallibility or invulnerability is going to grow along with his aggressiveness. Now, here's some analysis coming out there. Netanyahu's victory is clear break with U.S.-led peace process. And that's a very interesting development because we're also seeing this other story in Russia today. White House pushing Palestinian statehood in face of Netanyahu win. Now, this could just be the U.S. government posturing and trying to make it look like they're adversarial, try and repair some of the damage that was done by Netanyahu's speech before Congress. And all these people in the United States Congress who were bashing on the White House for not blindly supporting Israel and declaring war on Iran. This is not something that the government needs the public in the United States or around the world to see. So it may be posturing, or it may be symptoms that the break between the U.S. and Israel is very real and growing, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. Now, needless to say, my comment about election fraud is not without merit. We have a story even in the Jerusalem Post reporting that the exit polls and the final official election results didn't exactly line up. In fact, they described it as large gaps. And the reason you have exit polls is not just to feed the news media with something to talk about, but it's to verify the accuracy of the official vote. When they don't line up, it usually means the election was stolen. Unless you're here in the United States or in Israel, and then they say, the voters were lying to the exit pollers, or something else to make it all kind of go away. But apparently, as of right now, the Israeli police are investigating 51 cases of voting fraud. There are 23 suspects currently being pursued. And it's a reminder of that old statement by Joseph Stalin. It is enough that the people know there was an election. The people who cast the votes decide nothing. The people who count the votes decide everything. And given that the pre-election polls were showing Likud in serious trouble, and there were these huge anti-Netanyahu demonstrations, I don't think this was an honest, fair, and accurate election. All righty, we're going to grab a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Dustin, are you there? Hello?
Hello?
There you are.
Hello?
Okay.
Hi, Mike. Yeah, I don't think it's ever going to be fair because the systems in all of our countries are basically corrupt, where even if he didn't get in, I don't know if there will really be any structural changes in Israel because of the system.
No, I'm not expecting there to be any dramatic changes. In fact, basically, this is all more of the same, and there are, unfortunately, a lot of articles that are being just as rough on the people of Israel for voting Netanyahu back in as there were against the American voters for giving George W. Bush a second term. How could they be that stupid? We're not being stupid. Our elections are being stolen. We saw it here in the U.S. I think we're seeing it again in Israel. We certainly saw it up at Scotland during their independence referendum. They weren't even trying to hide the vote fraud up there. And it's just more of the same. And it doesn't matter if they're electronic machines or paper ballots. If the system is not open and verifiable and transparent, then it's obviously going to be rigged, because politicians as a class of people will cheat, regardless of race, creed, color, religion, gender, bias, whatever. That's how they get to be politicians.
And Israel's economy is in the crapper because ours is in the crapper. So, there is still a percentage of Israelis that are just, they have enough money where they'll keep voting for him. But if you saw, the election results, there's a lot of Israelis that aren't happy with the way the system is. Changing it's another story though. It's they got the fear factor they throw in there, the scare tactics.
Well, they're ramping it up. Even with the election over, they're definitely ramping it up, because the next step is a global war against Iran, against Russia, against China. They're clearly headed that direction, and it's all about which piece of paper and ink everybody's going to use, and the money junkies behind these wars absolutely care not for the millions, potentially billions of lives that will be lost. It's just a great game, and that's what those poor people are for, to be just thrown into the battle.
One thing that really bothers me, though, is the system, how bad it is. There's actually people that are worse than Netanyahu, which is, that's insane. I mean, I just can't picture, I can actually picture it, but he's crazy, but there's people that are even crazier than him.
I'm not sure I would describe Netanyahu as crazy. He's obviously narcissistic and sociopathic, which puts him on the borderline. But he's also very clever and skilled at what he does, which is why he is where he is. And you're absolutely right. We don't know if Herzog would have been any better. We certainly know that back when they were talking about a rotating prime ministership with Tzipi Livni, they absolutely did not want to see her with any kind of authority. But politics attracts people who shouldn't be allowed to have political power. Just think of the political system of every country as a giant septic tank where the really big chunks are always going to float to the top, and you'll begin to understand why Netanyahu is still Prime Minister of Israel and why we can't seem to get any decent candidates to vote for in our own elections, except for Ron Paul and Cynthia McKinney and people like that who very quickly get excluded from the game.
That's because they're not for the system. If you're not for the system, you get flushed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what's going on. We have to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call, Dustin, and we will be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And before we go back to the phones, a couple of real quick stories. We have been seeing all over the world where anytime somebody wants some kind of a meeting on boycott and divestment, or even an academic discussion on international law and how it applies to the Palestinian situation, immediately the Israel supporter groups come out and say, oh, it's Jew hate, it's anti-Semitism, it's this, it's that, you're biased, you're prejudiced. And so it's kind of interesting to see this story over an electronic intifada. Apparently in Great Britain, they're getting ready to have a We Believe in Israel conference. And apparently they're being very selective in terms of who's going to be allowed into the door. And this article was written by somebody who applied to attend this conference, did not conceal who he was, and was told there was no room available for him, but apparently discovered that all of these stars of the Islamophobia industry have been welcomed with open arms. It's just going to be a bunch of people getting up there and screaming, bad Muslims, bad Muslims. And let's be very honest and realistic here. Israel would benefit from a new unholy crusade, standing off to one side and laughing, while the dumb Christians and dumb Muslims kill each other off, which would leave Israel and its nuclear arsenal in control of the Middle Eastern oil resources, and through that oil, pretty much the rest of the world. And so that's a big part of all of a sudden this Muslim bashing and Jew hating, Muslim hating that we're seeing all over the place. They're trying to literally start a whole new holy crusade. This is the 21st century. And they're back to trying to run the world the way it was run in the 1400s. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Steve in Florida, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. As far as the Israeli election, Netanyahu back in power, I think actually it's about the best thing that could happen, because remember, last month, Netanyahu came busting into the United States Congress, and despite everybody, tons of people, Israelis, saying, well, no, it's going to look too obvious. It's, it's going to make Israel look bad and all this kind of thing.
Which did happen.
Which did happen, and I was praying that he wouldn't be reasonable about it, or he wouldn't, he would just be his arrogant self. So, I think this is much like that, because him being back in power, he's only going to damage Israel's reputation even further, and it'll be blatantly obvious, his arrogance.
Well, you're not the only person who has made that observation, that Netanyahu staying on as prime minister is just going to accelerate Israel's isolation in the world.
Oh, okay, I'm not, huh?
No, you're not. That's actually turning up in quite a few places.
Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to say that. It's just like, I think it really, because we get somebody, if there were somebody more sneaky and more like moderate or seemingly more reasonable, they would be seen, or could handle like the PR and all that kind of thing. They would seem like, make them look better, but Bibi does them no favors.
No, he really doesn't. And again, the Israeli police are already investigating at least 51 cases of election fraud. And if they have discovered 51 already within 24 hours, it's probably a lot more that they haven't found or never will find. And
but Bibi's going to bury that.
Of course. The corporate media will say it doesn't change the final outcome, but they really have no way of knowing that for a fact.
Right. But anyway, I thought it was a different way of looking at the whole thing, and I'm glad that things happened the way they did, because he's just gonna cut his own throat.
Yeah, but he may take a lot of people along with him. In fact, I'm expecting him to celebrate his election victory by launching another war into Gaza any minute.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope not. Anyway, thanks, Mike.
All right, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call here. Now, up in Ukraine, there's been an interesting turn of events regarding the Nemtsov assassination. Apparently, the assassins threw the gun into the river. It was successfully recovered by divers. And according to the FSB, they have identified who they think was behind all of this. And it's a commander of the Ukrainian battalion named Adam Omayev. And they're saying this was a hit for hire, for money, and these same people may have also been gunning for Vladimir Putin himself, which might also go a long way to explain why Putin was not seen in public for those several days while they tried to basically find if there was an assassination plot against him. Alrighty, now Spain has joined the rapidly growing club of European Union nations saying no more sanctions against Russia. Our economies cannot afford it. We're already in dire straits because of the mismanagement of the European Central Bank, and more of these European countries are hopping off the war wagon for war with Russia because they understand it's not going to be containable to just eastern Ukraine. It will go right across the borders and spread all across Europe, and they've already been through that. They don't need another one. And so this coalition to go tough with Russia is beginning to fall apart. Now, interestingly enough, Barack Obama made a comment the other day where he said, ISIS is a direct outgrowth of Al-Qaeda in Iraq that grew out of our invasion, which is an example of unintended consequences, which is why we should generally aim before we shoot. Now, his statement is more or less accurate, but on its basic principles, he's absolutely right. We're seeing a lot of unintended, unexpected blowback from U.S. foreign policy. Now, I'm still of the opinion that Al-Qaeda was a propaganda fake and ISIS is exactly the same. But the context of the discussion is, yeah, right now the U.S. is caught up in dealing with blowback. That's the term of crap that you hear in the intelligence agencies, blowback. We go in, we tinker with the country for our benefit, and then it blows back on us. Classic example, go into Iran in 1953, overthrow their elected government, put in the Shah of Iran. 1979, we get the blowback, the Iranian Revolution. Same thing in Chile with Allende and Pinochet. Or the Philippines with Ferdinand Marcos and Imelda, the queen of the shoe stores, as it were. And Obama is, of course, being criticized by the war hawks, saying, no, they're evil because they're Muslim. We are not to blame for all the upset over there. They're just Muslim and they hate us and we have to go hate them and so forth and so on. And again, we can't get any of these people out there screaming about war with Iran or Russia to actually sign a military enlistment form or have their children do the same. They're splendidly brave as long as it's other people's blood that's going to get spilled. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And there's a very troubling story that was on Fox News earlier today. New photos reveal expanding reach of Iran in Venezuela and other parts of Latin America. And what this is the pitch for an invasion of Venezuela justified as containing Iran. Now, we know the U.S. has been trying to regime change Venezuela going all the way back to the days of Hugo Chavez. The government of Venezuela thwarted a U.S.-sponsored coup plot a couple of weeks ago. And immediately, Obama declared sanctions on Venezuela for their violations of human rights. This coming from the government that tortured innocent Iraqis to death to find nuclear weapons that never existed. Just to give you a degree of hypocrisy that's coming out of this government. All right, we're going to grab ourselves another phone call. David in Canada, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good day, sir. How are you?
Fine.
I got a tip that you were into, so I downloaded some of your archives and listened in.
Yes.
So I tweeted you earlier today on a Twitter account. I give you a number of tips about the Senate Banking Committee, etc.
I'll have to look for that. I don't stay logged into Twitter. I put stuff out on Twitter. I actually don't look at it, or even for that matter, Facebook. If you have information like that, you really should send it to the email address at the website. But after the show, I will log into Twitter and look for your tweet.
Yeah, I sent you more than one tweet. It was about 6 in a row.
Okay.
Because there was too much information to put in each tweet. But long story short, you have a concern about the banking industry, etc.
Yes.
And then anybody can check while we're speaking on the air. If you Google U.S. or Senate Banking Committee, your number one hit will be the U.S. Senate Committee on Banking and Housing and Urban Affairs. If you go to the website, click on hearings. Click on the tab to view all the hearings. Go to the year 2003. There was a hearing over the course of 2 days, November the 18th and November the 20th, 2003. It was entitled Review of Current Investigations Regarding the Mutual Fund Industry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the whistleblower that caused that hearing.
Ah, well, congratulations.
Well, what you should do to make sure that I'm not pulling your leg.
Yeah.
You can just have your help or yourself sometime. You can check my tweets because I provide the links for you, but Senate Banking Committee will give you the U.S. congressional records. Above Senator Shelby's smiling face is a click for the hearing. There's a search bar. You tip on the tab, go to the year 2003, and I believe the second day of the hearing is the second link down. Please take careful notice that the transcript and the webcast are missing.
Ah, I'll definitely have to look into that. I will look for your tweets and follow up on all of that after today's radio show. I obviously can't do it while I'm in the middle of all this stuff, but in the future, I don't really spend a lot of time looking at Twitter or, for that matter, Facebook. And if you have information like that, email to the website is probably the best way to go, and that's wrh@whatreallyhappened.com. And that is really where I spend most of my attention.
Yeah, well,
okay.
Anybody that's listening to the show can just type what I said in and see for themselves, and you should ask your congressman, your senator, where's the hearing?
I'll have to look into that. Okay?
Okay.
All right, well, listen, congratulations on getting the... okay, well, he hung up. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. All right, now, speaking of Canada, Canada's immigration minister is apparently out there loaded for bear or for the Russian bear. Apparently he was at a fundraising dinner in Toronto last week of February and basically got up there just saying every military option must be exercised in order to give Russian President Vladimir Putin a comeuppance. He's up there getting ready to convince Canadians we have to make war on Russia. And this is Chris Alexander, Canada's Minister of Immigration and Citizenship. And Chris, if you really feel that way about it, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we'll call Putin and tell him you are on your way to kick his butt all by yourself. We need a new rule for human civilization. The people who want to have a war, let's send them off to fight it themselves. Keep our kids safe at home. Because they're all splendidly brave when it's other people's children at risk. Let's find the true measure of their commitment to the necessity for war by putting them on the front lines. With body armor supplied by the lowest bidder, I might add. Now, over in Germany, they're having major protests/riots in Frankfurt, and there's been a report of a lot of violence and reprisals by the police. This was supposed to have been a peaceful demonstration by Blockupy against the new headquarters for the European Central Bank. And, of course, some people showed up and threw rocks and Molotov cocktails. Those were probably agent provocateurs to give the police an excuse to come in and club all these nasty protesters and get them away from those poor, struggling, sacrosanct, most holy and inviolable bankers. But the Blockupy movement is going to continue their peaceful protest, but it is rather dramatic over there. Now, if you're following the stock market, you saw that for most of the morning, the Dow was, well, all the indices were in the red, and then the Fed finally announced there will be no immediate rate hike, and of course the stock market went right through the roof, just soaring into the green. Everybody's saying, huzzah, huzzah, it's proof the economy is recovering. No, it isn't. Because for the stock market to be changed that much by the Federal Reserve announcement tells us that the current stock market is driven by the availability of cheap money with which to play in that giant open-air casino and not by the actual profits of the traded corporations. Because the way they're keeping the market up is the Federal Reserve is putting out a whole bunch of money at almost zero interest. So, of course, investors on Wall Street will borrow as much as they can. They'll go to the market goes up. They'll sell their stock. They'll pay the money back to the bank. And the difference is their profit. They put it in their pocket, thousands of dollars every day. That's being looted from the economic system and for which nothing of substantive value is returned to the nation, its people, or its economy. It's a gaming table It's a casino. If our stock market was truly representative of the productivity of our economy as a whole, this announcement would not have had much of an effect at all, because people would be buying and selling stocks based on their value, based on their earnings. And for this one announcement to just transform the market like this tells you how dependent the current sky-high stock market is on that cheap money coming out of the Federal Reserve. And that is a red warning sign. Another red warning sign coming out of Europe is Greece. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. Athens has now rejected the European Union Commissioner's rejection of Athens' offer of a bill. Apparently, the European Commission is very angry that Athens is not providing creditors with financial information that is being demanded. And we're seeing stories like this one in Zero Hedge. The European Central Bank is preparing for a Greek exit and anticipates a 95% loss on Greek debt. And that means that any credit default swaps sold against Greece's debt are going to come due and payable. And those banks and financial institutions that sold those credit default swaps do not have the cash to make good on them. Gee, I wonder where they're going to get the money to pay it off. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. So we're talking about the situation in Europe with the economy, and the European Central Bank is anticipating a 95% loss on Greek debt. And that is not the worst of it, because somewhere out there, we know there are trillions and trillions of dollars of credit default swaps sold against all of Europe's debt, some of which has to include Greece as well. And I'm looking at a story from Zero Hedge. Greece is just the tip of the iceberg for the $100 trillion bond bubble. Now, we're already hearing indications that when Greece leaves the European Union, they may be followed rapidly by some of the other European member nations who have been strangled by the European Central Bank and their debt-based currency. And that, too, will trigger more of those credit default swaps. Now, story out of Investment Watch blog, de-dollarization continues while China gets stronger on gold reserves and gains traction with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB. That's a new acronym that you need to keep in mind. Now, remember a couple of weeks ago where Obama came out and said that, yes, the U.S. uses its military or threat of military to arm twist other nations to do what the U.S. wants. Well, apparently he's back to it already, because over at Activist Post, they're carrying a story where the U.S. is now warning their allies, our friends, not to join this China bank. Don't you dare do it. Don't you dare do it. We'll do something nuclear. And that underscores the fact that the current militarism of the United States of America has nothing to do with Islam and terror and nuclear weapons and sarin gas. It's an argument over whose particular brand of paper and ink will be the go-to global trade and banking currency for the next 100 years. And the U.S. is rattling their sabers at anybody who deals directly with China without first going through the U.S. dollar. And again, I want to point something out. Back when the Bretton Woods Agreement was originally signed at the end of World War II, in an age where most accounts were still being settled, if not with actual bullion, with boxes of paper notes, it did make sense to have a single trusted global trade and banking currency. But in this day of instantaneous global electronic transaction, verifiable, the idea of needing a single trade banking currency around the globe is obsolete. It's not necessary. It's pointless. China continues to dump their U.S. Treasury bonds, while European allies continue to join the Development Bank. Sweden has slid further into negative interest rates. It's now cut to a negative 0.25%. It's now costing you money to have a savings account at the bank. You put in $100, and a little bit later you got $99.75. And it continues that way. And that's over and above. That's separate and distinct from the threat of bail-ins, which they're talking about all across Europe. What they did in Cyprus, they're now saying, well, this is our solution. We're just going to help ourselves to the savings accounts. Because those people put their money in our bank, well, they're unsecured investors, and if we lose money, they have to lose money. Now, this is now outdated because of the Fed's announcement earlier. But hedge fund billionaire Ray Dalio was saying that if the Fed had increased the prime rate, it would have driven the markets into chaos because the Federal Reserve has, in his words, little ammunition available to combat an economic downturn. The only ammunition they have right now is simply running that printing press or typing more numbers into the computer. That's all they can do. And now they're stuck. All of these private central bank nations are now engaged in exactly the same thing we call quantitative easing in this country, which is the central bank is just creating money out of thin air and pouring it all over the financial sector to make everything look good. They're devaluing their own currency. They're working at ways to try and keep the visible signs of inflation away from the public, and yet we see it at the supermarkets. Prices for imported goods, it's unstable, and it's got to crash. The only question is where and how. Something has to happen that the government can't patch over, the Federal Reserve can't inflate the problem away. And now we're seeing another story where Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are heading for yet another bailout. Now remember, the taxpayers poured $200 billion into Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac after the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud in 2008. Now the Obama administration used taxpayer-subsidized loans to move a large amount of the foreclosed housing inventory from Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and into big investment funds. But while they were doing it, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were ballooning their mortgage holdings again. And so now they're saying, yep, probably going to need another bailout here. Probably going to need another bailout. For any of you who've been on like a rowboat on a lake or something, and it's leaking through the bottom and you're bailing like crazy, there does come that moment where you realize it doesn't matter how hard you bail, the boat is sinking, and your best option is to hop out, wade to shore. That's where we are right now. Jeb Bush, at an event in South Carolina yesterday, was asked if he thought the federal minimum wage should be raised, and he said it should be eliminated. Just doesn't need to be there. You know, these people should be willing to work for $1 an hour. They're lucky to have jobs at all. What's wrong with these slaves? All right. Now then, a whistleblower has come forward detailing the ramifications for State Department employees who do not sign the separation agreement. We've been seeing this all over the news about how apparently Hillary Clinton did not sign this. And apparently it's a little more important than the corporate media were telling us, because the signing of this agreement is basically an assurance by that person that they have turned over to the State Department all classified materials and no longer have that in their own possession. And apparently for lower-level State Department employees, refusal to sign the separation form could lead to loss of benefits and investigations looking into just why it was you didn't want to sign this. And now we know that Hillary didn't sign it, and she had classified information on her private email server. And so the State Department is now confirming they have absolutely no documentation that Hillary Clinton turned over all the classified information and official documents back to the State Department when she ceased to be Secretary of State. Now, there's not a lot I agree with John Boehner on, but obviously I think we're all applauding when he says that Hillary's private email server ought to be given to a disinterested, impartial third party for forensic analysis. It's a great symbolic move, but I have no doubt that Hillary has already hired very top IT people to make sure there's nothing left on the hard drives to be discovered. There is special software you can get that makes sure a deleted file is really gone. Meanwhile, Hillary's back on the campaign trail, and she's out there screaming the Republicans are guilty of a trifecta against women. She's going to be running in 2016 on women's issues, which is why all of a sudden you're seeing the male bash, rape hysteria, women are discriminated against. All the stuff recycled from the 1990s is all coming back again. Women are oppressed, I stand for the women. So Hillary is running for primarily on the women's vote. And she's expecting that American women are going to vote her into office despite all of the bad things that she's done just because she's a woman. Hillary actually thinks American women are that dumb and that gullible, where all she has to do is wag abuse, rape, oppression, patriarchy at them, and they'll forget all about all the other stuff that Hillary has done and vote her in, or at least close enough to where the vote riggers can steal it for her. Meanwhile, the Obama administration is being sued over the U.S. drone kill list because the Obama administration has been carrying out extrajudicial executions all around the globe in other people's countries, in countries that we are not at war with, that have not done anything to us. And they're refusing to release the list of targets, and now a civil liberties group is suing the Obama administration under that Public Records Act. We'll be right back after the news. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. And we have a caller waiting already. Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk about a headline I saw in a newspaper.
Yes.
It says, for the upcoming St. Patrick's Day parade here in Boston, it says gays are in the parade, but Veterans for Peace are shunned. So they have a veterans group that want to promote peace, and they're not allowed to march in the parade.
Well, because anybody who supports peace is not a real American, don't you understand? Americans love the sting of battle. They love the blood and gore, and so forth and so on. No, we saw exactly the same thing in the run-up to Big Mistake number 1 and Big Mistake number 2. Groups that were opposed to war were shunned, excluded, basically driven into the shadows, driven underground. We're seeing exactly the same thing again. They're trying to find ways to silence any voice that's not up there saying, yes, war is fun, it'll be great. I love the sight of mushroom clouds and flaming napalm all over the place. What was that wonderful line from Apocalypse Now? I love the smell of napalm in the morning. It smells like victory.
Yeah, that was it.
That was it.
It just goes to show where their minds are. God forbid if we have peace. And our actions of our president shows it too.
Well, unfortunately, the history of this nation has been that every time the economy gets into serious trouble and is on the verge of collapse, they get into a world war. If not to totally solve it, at least to distract everybody from it. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, here we are.
Now, speaking of collapse, I heard that Janet Yellen is going to possibly raise the rates. She can't do that, can she? She's got to be bluffing.
Well, the rates are decided on by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve by vote, and they've already announced that the rates will not be increased anytime soon. So all of the Wall Street money junkies are out there borrowing money at virtually zero interest so they can go back in and game the stock market even higher.
Yeah, I heard if she does raise the rates, then it'll pretty much blow up the economy.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. All of this quantitative easing was sold to us as a temporary emergency measure, and now they're hooked. They can't shut it down. They have to keep on printing up all this new money to keep the stock market looking like it's functioning. And meanwhile, of course, the rest of us are paying the price for it, because the more money is in circulation, the less our money is actually worth. And it's like Janet Yellen is waving Voldemort's wand up there at the Federal Reserve, and the money that's already in your pocket, that you already worked for, that's in your savings account, that's in the cookie jar, buried out by the pineapple plantation, it's losing value, just sitting there. And when you add on top of that the coming negative interest rates on savings accounts, the bail-ins where they'll just help themselves to huge chunks of your savings account. And it's very obvious that they're propping up this illusion of a healthy economy in Wall Street by looting the rest of the nation to do it.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Never good news.
Well, I wish I had some good news for you, but, that's really up to the money junkies in the government, and they're in the business of creating bad news because that's what makes them money and gets them more power.
Yeah, these are scary times because
they are.
You look around and you see so much action, and all the countries are preparing for war, and there's really no talk about it whatsoever that we're on the brink of World War III.
Well, you haven't been listening to this show. We've been saying that for years now. We're heading into a new world war to clean up this financial mess. The U.S. is simply going to go and try and conquer other people's wealth to satisfy the bankers, or go into countries to which they owe money and simply say, we won the war, we don't owe you any more money at all. That's how the entire global Ponzi scheme gets reset, with a bloody global war. And it gets rid of all those surplus, useless eaters along the way, which is, I think, probably one of the reasons why that Canadian gentleman, Chris, is up there saying, we've got to go to war against Russia. Why? What's Russia done to Canada?
Well, like you say, here's your parachute.
Yep, here's your rifle and here's your parachute here. No, when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, we need to go back to the good old, as long as they're dragging us back to a new dark ages. We need to go back to that model of government and military, where the leaders in government who wanted a war led their own troops into battle, whether it was Alexander the Great or Napoleon or any of those people. They put their own lives on the line. And today, of course, our leaders hide in their little bunkers on our side of the world and send other people's children to fight and die on wherever it is their business interests are cranking up.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful song called Blood on the Wire by Jackson Browne. And I first heard it. They used it as a piece of a soundtrack in the original Miami Vice TV series by Michael Mann. And the episode was Stone's War. And it was a brilliant series, and it was a brilliant episode, and that's why it got canceled, because toward that last season, Michael Mann was beginning to point to the link between the big banks and drug running and terror, and of course that can't be allowed to be known by the public. The public is not supposed to know what's really going on in the bankers' marble palaces and the bowels of power. In many ways, modern Americans are just as deluded about the true nature of their government as the medieval peasants were.
And speaking of songs, you really don't hear too many protest songs like you used to.
Well, there are ban lists. I mean, Clear Channel was actually open about that. They have a ban list of rock and roll songs that will not be played, and they're mostly the anti-war songs from the 1960s, the Vietnam era. The songs are all about product placement and having a good time, and songs about the social issues just aren't there. Some of the rap music is, but no, songs about how bad war is, no, that can't be allowed on the air. We'll lose our advertising revenues from General Dynamics and Rockwell and all those other companies.
Actually, for the longest time, I couldn't find War Pigs from Black Sabbath on iTunes. It was not on there for the longest time, and it's an older song. I don't know if you're familiar with it at all.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Mike.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Now then, the anti-gun propaganda is cranking up. We know that the ATF is trying to figure some way that they can ban ammunition without having every gun owner in America stand up and say, wait a minute, that's an infringement under the Second Amendment. Especially because, and they blew it because they were trying to ban a type of ammunition because it's a cop killer, only to find out that no cops have actually been shot with it. And they're still out there screaming, we got to find some way to disarm the American people. Let them keep their guns, but take away the bullets. At one point, they were actually suggesting that for environmental reasons, that lead bullets ought to be banned, and instead, bullets ought to be made out of tungsten, because that's environmentally friendly, unless you're hit by it. And the thinking behind that is very, very simple. If you're firing tungsten bullets, you're going to wear out that gun barrel very, very quickly. Now, story that we saw out of LiveLeak, apparently there was this anti-gun group that opened up a phony gun store, and when people would come in to try and buy guns, they would be hit with a presentation about, don't you know that this model gun was used to kill these people, and this gun was used to kill these people, and it's underhanded, to say the least. Thankfully, it's not all that broadcast. It's a one-on-one piece of propaganda. And here's a very bizarre story. This is over at Patriot Rising. Leftist media is now out there claiming that if you are a supporter of the Second Amendment, you also support rape. That's how desperate they are to try and undermine our right to keep and bear arms. And they're saying basically if you're advocating concealed carry, you're setting these guys up to be rapists. No, actually, let's get the women concealed carry weapons, and the rape will go down, because that is what happens when women are allowed to carry guns and are trained to use them. But they are getting so desperate out there. They're scared of us. They are really, really scared of us. We'll be back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I'm looking at Fox News, and they're talking about Al Gore's political comeback. With Hillary in trouble, it may be necessary for the Democrats to bring back Al Gore. I wouldn't really hitch all your horses to that particular cart, because by the time 2016 gets here, we're going to be in a new little ice age. And Al Gore is the personification of the human-caused global warming fraud. And we're going to be talking about that a little later in the show. The propaganda is already coming out. Oh, this was the warmest winter on record. I mean, I'm not kidding. They're absolutely convinced that you are so enslaved to the corporate media that they will tell you it was a warm winter, and you will just magically forget all the snow and ice and all the rest of that, and you will believe as you're told to believe, because loyal Americans always believe what the government tells them to believe. That's what it means to be a loyal American. All righty. I thought we'd had a phone call waiting, but I guess not here. Article out of The Guardian. Over in Great Britain, The Uncounted. Why the U.S. can't keep track of people killed by police. And we understand why. That's not a number they want you to know. But this article basically goes into some examples of how innocent Americans are wrongfully murdered by the police, and it doesn't get any media coverage, no official acknowledgement. They got plenty of statistics for the number of robberies and rapes and burglaries, but nobody's keeping track of these numbers. But, of course, independent researchers, citizen activists, are starting to pull that information together, and it is stunning. You, as an American citizen, are 55 times more likely to be wrongfully murdered by a police officer than killed by a terrorist. We got a caller on the line here, Dorothy in Ohio. Welcome back to the show, and I'm sorry I didn't get to you on the phone yesterday, but what's on your mind today?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. We do need to do somewhat of a rollback. From a political stance, we need to not let people come into office who have done nothing but kept going the old problem. I know that the Veterans for Peace have kind of been sidelined because they have marched repeatedly in parades against the School of the Americas, which Fort Benning, Georgia, has taught how to torture and abuse people in foreign countries, often through our own military, which they've attempted to shut down for decades.
Yes.
And this is also just part of the same bantering system of, like right now, in our Congress that is stopping the movement forward of the human trafficking issue. Now, please know, human beings are not cars, but they're putting them into a very objectification kind of issue.
No question.
They're not breaking it down to talk about human sexual slavery and what it does to children throughout their life into adulthood, which was happening in the military under torture in the 70s, 80s, and 90s to a great many, over 760,000.
Been happening in the churches, been happening at the BBC, been happening in Westminster.
Connected.
Yeah, it's.
That's right. They're all connected.
Okay.
And the other is that it also deals with labor and it deals with body parts. And they're not breaking out these issues because they're so profoundly disturbing. And to really get survivors up to talk about it rather than these stage actors, I was in the military. I witnessed this. I reported it. I went through it. My world has been destroyed despite I have five degrees, including advanced degrees. My life has been threatened. Mm-hmm. I have been threatened to be put into prison if I talk about what I went through or saw. And the sad thing is, the shattering these human beings, these good and decent people, even when they have tried to get competent medical help through our VAs or any place else, they are destroying these lives. This is the same system that is in power. We need a clean sweep. We need people who are willing to stand up. This is not whistleblowing, folks. This is hate crimes. To do this to human beings, to traumatize them and brutalize them and never allow them the right to recover, the right to work without being attacked in those jobs. I've seen it firsthand, and I have many different degrees, and I'm willing to stand up and talk about it. I wanted to actually run for president one day. Instead, they destroyed my life because honesty is no longer valued in this country.
Oh, honesty is with a government that lies. Honesty is an act of treason and revolution.
Oh, absolutely.
You know.
And that's why I'm saying these are hate crimes. This is not whistleblowing. And it's time for people to get together and say enough of this craziness. The people who have been there, who knew of these crimes. There are 7 laws of immunity. They give immunity to military who are raping and brutalizing them, their own. That was passed by Congress. If you go up to the presidents of the United States, and there have been at least 6 to 7 cases of military persons who were tortured and brutalized and worse, you have to go to the presidency of the United States. Once you exhaust that, only then can you get into the U.S. court systems. And then they stop it through these different immunity laws. And this is a reason why we've gone from rape to human sexual slavery and trafficking.
Well, there's a couple of overlapping issues here. We're coming up on a commercial break, so let me get in a couple of words here. First of all, we have come to understand that the attitude of the ultra-rich and the top politicians, they tend to view the human population as property, as livestock, as human capital, and they treat us that way. You will eat this, you will not eat that. You will have this medication, you will not. They treat us like cattle and chicken and the rest of it. The other part of it, of course, is that we know that there are secrets and scandals that make fodder for political campaigns, but we also know there are the big secrets, the ones that are so horrible that they would bring the government down as a whole, and nobody talks about them. Even if their direst political enemy is engaged in this practice, you don't bring it out into the sunlight or it destroys the legitimacy of the entire government. We had a huge child sexual abuse scandal in the U.S. government a few years ago called the Franklin Scandal. And everybody in Washington, D.C. just united to make sure that this was withdrawn from the public eye as quickly as possible. And we're seeing a repeat of that over in this whole Westminster scandal. And I think the world is beginning to really wake up and understand these people in these positions of immense wealth and power are seriously mentally ill. That's how they get to be there. That's what drives them to seek that kind of money and power. And so what they're doing isn't shocking. It's just the way they are. And
and these are organized criminal trauma networks.
Yep.
And they run throughout all of our society, and they keep these victims shattered and traumatized. Because I saw it. I also saw how they were turning out both married women, men and women, children, to senior leadership. And again, they destroy these people's lives.
Well, you know, it's sort of more of the Jeff Epstein thing, or if you look at the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, that whole story was about his daughter was grabbed by one of these trafficking rings. Dorothy, I got to let you go. We're coming up on a commercial break. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you again soon. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And not too long ago, there was a bit of a scandal where it was discovered that Wikipedia entries regarding police brutality cases in New York were being altered from within the New York Police Department itself. And the NYPD has identified 2 officers who were using police department computers to sanitize Wikipedia entries. And, of course, nothing will happen to them. They're not going to be punished. The First Amendment guarantees our right to cover up things and lie about them. No, it doesn't, actually. The First Amendment exists to protect the truth, not to protect liars. Also in New York, a judge has ordered the Erie County Sheriff's Office to release all the information on the use of the Stingray cell phone interception device. Now, Stingray is very controversial. Again, it is one of these devices that violates your Fourth Amendment right to privacy, and the police departments that use it, in order to purchase it from its manufacturer, have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Nobody wants the full details out, but there's a case brought by the New York Civil Liberties Union And the judge has agreed with him and said, yes, the Stingray records have to be turned over so the New York public will understand where, how, and most importantly, how often the police are listening in on their cell phones. Meanwhile, story out of TechDirt.com, apparently the law enforcement intelligence communities are just absolutely in a freak out over the fact that Apple and Google are now encrypting all cell phone information by default. And of course, the counter-argument's coming back, it's always about the children. Think about the children who are kidnapped and we can't find them because the cell phones are encrypted. We've got to have access to the terrorists will get you, and the same kind of fear-mongering. But let's be very honest. Right now, the government is the biggest threat to us all and our data. They have been caught stealing business information from the computers of the American people and others to give to their cronies. Now, one of the arguments that was coming back from the other side is, this is basically creating a house that we can't go into and a trunk that we can't open. Well, actually, under the Fourth Amendment, until you have a signed warrant by a judge based on probable cause, you're not allowed to come into our homes or the trunk of our car or anything else. Period. End of discussion. Now, the government's approach to encryption has been all along, give us a key to your house and just trust us, we won't misuse it. And that's extraordinarily foolish. Now, apparently, the FBI and Department of Justice are one step closer to getting an okay to hack any computer anywhere on the planet without needing any kind of oversight whatsoever. And they're not the only ones. I'm looking at the story in Russia Today where GCHQ has been given the authority by the British government to hack any device anywhere in the world, even in the absence of an actual terrorist or criminal threat. We just want to look to see what you might be up to. Now, Great Britain is not protected by a document like the Constitution, but here in the United States of America, because of the habit of the British regulars of just walking into colonial homes and looking around just to make sure nobody was doing something wrong, is why the Founding Fathers put that Fourth Amendment in there. Until you have actual evidence of a crime, probable cause, statement under oath, something like that, the government has no business looking into your private life just in case something might be amiss. And all of this spying, certainly here in the United States of America, it delegitimizes the U.S. government. Because remember, the federal government's authority rests on that Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Those are the rules the government must follow to be seen as the legal, legitimate government of this country. And if they don't play by the rules, they're not legal. They're not constitutional. They're not legitimate. They're just thugs in body armor and Nomex and Kevlar and machine guns, abusing us the way the Nazis abused the German people. And it's dangerously close to that right now. Another story out of Russia Today, apparently more reports of airdrops of weapons and supplies to ISIS. It's a big fraud. It's a manufactured enemy. Now, getting on to human-caused global warming, over at AccuWeather, they are acknowledging that the chill has returned to Boston. More snow, more freezing weather, past the start of spring, which is only 2 days away. Now, Atlantic Canada has been snowed under with their second snowstorm in the last 3 days. And they're saying it's probably going to intensify. Now, up on the Great Lakes, the ice that formed there has lingered so far into the spring that it's delaying the start of the 2015 shipping season. Now, back in February, Forbes was reporting that this record cold and snow destroy global warming claims, and they're absolutely right. But that's not going to stop the carbon Nazis. It's not going to stop Al Gore, especially if he's going to try and run for president in 2016. He's going to campaign as the man who warned us all about human-caused global warming. And so I wasn't too surprised to see earlier today, in USA Today no less, the banner headline, Earth had warmest winter on record. They're already out there trying to peddle this bovine excrement. And they make the claim the Earth just had its warmest winter on record, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced Wednesday. The U.S. government, the same U.S. government that told you Saddam had nuclear weapons and unemployment's only 5.5%, is out there now telling you that this was the warmest winter on record. Well, the reality is we had record cold, snow, and ice along the Northeast, had icebergs in Cape Cod, more record snow and cold in Colorado and other parts west. They had that town in Italy, got 100 inches of snow in a single 18-hour period. We had a blizzard last Friday on the Big Island that forced the evacuation of the observatories, and still the U.S. government and the carbon Nazis and the corporate media are pushing this human-caused global warming tripe as an excuse to take more of your money with the carbon tax and get you to submit control of your personal life to a global environmental authority. They are shameless in this fraud. And apparently USA Today is so convinced that you are all morons that you will believe them when they say that we just had the warmest winter on record because NOAA says so. And remember, we have documented NOAA shut down all the temperature measuring stations in the rural areas, which are cooler. They have their temperature stations in the outflow, the air conditioning outflow of buildings. They've got them in the middle of airports surrounded by jets pouring out tons of burned kerosene. And I was rather pleased to see on the USA Today article where the commenters were coming in and saying, are you out of your mind? Not around here it wasn't warm. We had record cold. And we set record cold temperatures here in Oahu. And I know those of you dealing with snow and ice aren't going to feel sorry about the fact that we were in the 50s here in Hawaii, but it's still a valid point that the cold and snow and ice was not just confined to the Northeast, which is the talking point the carbon Nazis are putting out there. Yes, the Northeast had a little snow and ice, but the rest of the world was the warmest winter on record. That's 4 out of 4 Pinocchios, in my opinion, over at USA Today. We're going to have to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about global warming or the absence thereof. We talked about this a little bit before. BBC recently aired a program trying to reassure everybody that global warming is real and pay no attention to that white stuff that's all over the ground. Global warming is real and you're to blame. They had these mathematicians and all these charts and stuff. And apparently they've come under fire because BBC's charter obligates them to deal with all issues with fairness and accuracy and impartiality. And now BBC is dealing with complaints that this particular program on global warming was so biased and so full of outright fraud and deception that basically the BBC broke the law. And I don't know if it's because BBC is financially tangled up with this whole carbon situation, or BBC, like every other media outlet, is trying to protect their reputation that they bet on this human-caused global warming. And they don't want to admit that they were flat out wrong, so they keep getting in deeper and deeper. All right, we're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. DJ in Georgia, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, thanks for taking the call. With the global warming stories there and in the media, everyone knows that basically government, any government propaganda that's been coming out of this administration and pretty much for a long while now is basically all lies. So I guess it might dupe a few people in the mainstream who still are following that stuff, but otherwise, people do know better. But the reason that I called is about, I don't know if you picked up some stories about, what was going on in Russia in terms of, there was a story that broke out, the, Kaspersky, whatever that lab is that does the hacking,
yes.
They do the security firm, and Russia, a Russian agency, had, intercepted information that, the UK was, plotting a nuclear strike against Russia.
I think that was a hoax. That one came as a hoax. Now, the data breach itself was real. Apparently, communications from the United States to Great Britain, for some reason, were being routed through a server in Kiev. That much actually did happen. But the story that Great Britain was planning a preemptive nuclear strike on Russia appears to be one of these many hoaxes being put out there to try and keep everybody stirred up and flinchy. And there was another one was making the rounds claiming that BBC had uncovered a plot by Iran to attack the United States. And, of course, it's not on BBC. There's a lot of fraud and hoaxes going on out there trying to keep us all confused and trying to keep us from pulling together a consensus of popular opinion as to exactly what's going on in the world. It's called jamming or poisoning the well or these various other propaganda terms. But again, you got to start finding, look for what should be there and isn't. And in the case of Britain launching an attack against Russia, what's missing is a reason to do that, knowing that Russia would retaliate. And this one claiming that BBC's uncovered a plot by Iran to attack the United States, what's missing? A reason for Iran to do that. Iran does not want a war. And
well, that's true. I think there is with that story that broke with the traffic, the security breach that happened where all the internet traffic was going through.
Mm-hmm.
They said that there was nuclear launch codes and everything that were trying to they were basically. It was a war, from what I understood, what I read it to be, it was a war game simulation, but they were aimed at Russia. And I think that with all the things that are going on currently, with all the troops that are massing up, the NATO, especially in Norway, where they're saying now that there's, over 14 or 18,000 U.S. troops, including, heavy artillery, tanks and
they're gearing up. They're gearing up for big mistake number 3. And yes, nuclear weapons will be involved. The only question is, will they start the war with nuclear weapons or just end the war with nuclear weapons like they did the last one? But they may be wargaming over the open internet, but we know, at least here in the United States of America, that since the ARPANET became the internet, the government has developed a parallel system to which the public does not have access. Military communications are isolated. They're not hooked up. So, the launch codes and directions. The only place where those are out there to be intercepted is when it's forced to go by radio, like the VLF and ELF going to the submarines. And, of course, those are all encrypted with one-time pads anyway, so nobody's going to figure out what those mean.
And real quick, did you hear about I guess the Victoria Nuland? She was the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. She was actually again quoted somewhere in the press where she was talking to the foreign affairs minister in Russia. She was scolding them about they were selling these weapons that were basically knocking out all the surveillance equipment, all this stuff, and she was kind of yelling at them, and she had made a comment about how Dick Cheney is in charge of the U.S. and not Obama. And I don't know, to me it seems like it would definitely, I wouldn't put that behind her to say something like that. But
well, she's saying a lot of outrageous things. Listen, I'm going to have to let you go because we've got one other caller I need to get to before the top of the show, and that's John in Barbados. John, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Just going back with the global warming hoax.
Mm-hmm.
NASA now have actually put temperature sensors into the deep Atlantic trenches and Pacific trenches and measured the temperature. It isn't warming. There's no ocean warming whatsoever in the deep ocean.
In the deep, well, we reported on that yesterday, and of course, during this whole global warming, and people were saying, well, why isn't it getting warmer? And so back in, I think it was 2009, the carbon Nazis were saying, well, the heat is hiding in the deep ocean. So we're getting warmer. It feels cooler on the surface, but all that heat is lurking in the bottom of the ocean, ready to wake up Godzilla and lay waste to the civilized world. And, of course, it betrays an absolute ignorance of the physics principle of convection. Warm water will rise. Even if there was some way to put a bunch of warm water at the bottom of the ocean, it would not stay there. It was a bogus explanation from the start, and either the people promoting this nonsense don't understand science, or they're simply assuming that you do not understand science. So that's...
And the other hoax that seems to be perpetrated by the BBC is that the Arctic ice and the Antarctic ice is shrinking, which is completely fallacious.
No, it's actually growing. It's actually growing. Oh, they're out there saying that the melting Arctic ice will trigger massive heat waves across the world this summer. And what they're going to do is, when we get into summer, they're going to say, oh, we've got a thermometer here that's showing 140 degrees, and we got another thermometer here that's showing 160 degrees. And again, we know that they are cooking the data because of the ClimateGate scandal. We know that they are positioning their pet thermometers in areas where they're going to get warm over asphalt, in air conditioning outflows near jet airplanes. They're really still trying to sell this hoax. Whatever's behind the human-caused global warming hoax, it's not just carbon taxes, it's not just carbon credits. There's something else behind it that is so important to them that even as ridiculous as they are looking, they're still out there trying to push this agenda.
I think it's pushing towards a world taxation system that will supply the central government of the world with cash. But that's another story. But I'm looking at the level of the ice. It extends all the way from the Bering Straits right across the top of Canada. The whole of the Arctic is frozen solid, and down to the east coast of America. The shorelines are frozen.
Yeah, would you send me that URL here? I mean, we were just talking about the fact that the Great Lakes are still iced over. They can't start the shipping season.
Yeah, well, the coastline is also iced up right down into New England.
Okay, well, would you email that to me?
I will do, yes.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to have to let you go. We're going to take a break for the top of the hour news, and when we come on back, we're going to have Michael Strizky of the Hydrogen House Project talking to us about how it works, how well it works, and settling the doubts that I had about it. And he's got a very good explanation for that. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We're still trying to make a connection with Michael Strizky from our control room to there, and I know Michael is waiting at his end on Skype, so hopefully, okay, they've got an issue. All right, hang on just a second. I'm going to tell the control room to use a phone number instead. Okay, and I know this is not professional radio for me to have to stop talking in order to get on out there, but apparently Skype is not behaving at their end. So we're going to get Michael on the phone to talk about the Hydrogen House project. Meanwhile, while we're waiting for the connection, what John in Barbados was saying is being reported in other places, where the corporate media is screaming that the South Pole is melting, the Arctic is almost free of ice. It's simply not true. If you go on out to the actual weather satellite images, scans, you can see there's a lot of ice, huge amounts of ice. But they're going to go on lying to you. There is something behind all this global warming, and it's more than just Al Gore wanting to be a billionaire and all these companies that were invested in carbon credits and governments wanting carbon taxes. It has to be really important to them, or they would not keep pushing this. Okay, we've got Michael Strizky on the line, and Michael, thank you for spending time with us today.
Hey, good day. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing really good. The reason I wanted to get you on the show, we had, I guess a fan is a good word for it, call in a couple of times talking about your project, and we had some very spirited discussions about it. I decided it was time to get you on the show to basically find out what's really going on. So tell us about Hydrogen House.
Well, the Hydrogen House project was a vision that I had after working in the fuel cell industry for almost 15 years. I knew that it was doable 15 years ago and say, why aren't we doing it? So I came up with the concept. I applied for a grant. I was awarded the grant. And it took me 3.5 years to get the permits because they didn't want it. I'm in an oil refining state. So they prevented every boundary in the world to try to keep me from going online. After that, after I had cleared all the hurdles with the DCA, they basically came back and tried to pull the permits after I had already gotten it. And then the funding agency, the New Jersey Board of Clean Energy, the people who gave me the grant said, basically, you can't do this. This was supposed to look like you're doing something, but never actually do it.
We've seen a lot of that.
And have this go online.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that where these projects will be funded in the expectation that they will be spectacular failures in order to preserve the status quo.
And that's what happened here. The only reason that this house is operating is because the New York Times stepped in at a time when our soldiers were dying over oil and basically wanted to put faces to the names of the people that were preventing technology that would free us from foreign oil and from the wars associated with it. So, there was a lot of battles in doing this, including having the funding agency walk away. This was a shot heard around the world. When the hydrogen home went online back in 2006, basically Reuters picked it up. It was in 36,000 publications. It was in the New York Times. It was covered heavily by the press all around the world. Discovery Science did a piece on the house. I've been in Scientific America. I've been New York Times Magazine, International Tribune, French and Russian TV. So the word is out there. The cat is out of the bag that this technology is real. And right now we've got Toyota saying, look, we're putting down our foots, we're putting up our hands, and we're going to make this happen. And it's the world's largest automaker. The hydrogen house I did half partly out of my own funding, and what I could raise from, friends, relatives, and companies that were involved in the gas industry. Toyota is, they know what Fukushima is, and they know what batteries can do to the environment after recycling them for 60 years and contaminating all their groundwater. So they know that the only real solution is the big nuclear ball in the sky, which will provide us with all the energy we could ever want. And since hydrogen is 80% of every molecule in the universe, you can make hydrogen out of just about anything. In fact, most of the fossil fuels that we've been using all our lives are all mostly hydrogen attached to carbon.
Mm-hmm.
What's a little different, what I do is basically there is no carbon involved. It starts as water, it ends as water, uses the power of the sun to do the conversion, and it stores forever. There's no shelf life. It's not like a battery that's dead in 5 years.
Well, that was one of the issues that I had raised with your supporter who called into the show because I'm former NASA myself, and I was aware that containing hydrogen can be very, very difficult in the cryogenic stage, but apparently when the hydrogen is at room temperature, it's a completely different set of physics, and the tanks will seep for a while until the molecular matrix is filled with hydrogen molecules, and at which point the tanks will hold the hydrogen and contain it for a very long period of time, as I understand.
Yeah, there's no problem with hydrogen embrittlement. There's none of the myths that the oil companies and various other entities have been putting out there are true about hydrogen. We've been using hydrogen safely since about the 1900s, with no episodes. I mean, even if you look at the Hindenburg had 100,000 cubic feet of hydrogen in it, and it didn't explode. Not like natural gas, propane, diesel, gasoline. It basically burned. And most of the people survived. When hydrogen is released, it's 45 miles an hour into the atmosphere, and it diffuses more rapidly in air than any other fuel, which is why the automakers who have the big deep pockets and have the huge, they're worried about the legal ramifications, just like, with the airbag people, that if this wasn't safer than what we already have, it wouldn't be happening. It wouldn't be going down the road at 80 miles an hour and getting a head-on crash or sitting in your garage. In a lot of ways, this is much safer than batteries, which can go thermonuclear, as we've seen with, a lot of things, including in Hawaii, the burning of the lithium-ion battery plants.
Yes, that's been a major problem. Okay, well, let me...
go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say, first of all, I'm going to keep you here for as long of the hour as you're willing to be. Stepping on back, we're now starting to understand that the Hindenburg disaster was not really caused by the hydrogen. The Hindenburg's outer envelope had been primed with iron oxide basically as a paint primer, and then overcoated with a powdered aluminum shiny paint, not realizing that they basically created a thermite envelope, and that was really where most of the heat and damage and destruction from the fire came. And the funny thing is, the company that was owning and operating the Hindenburg had actually issued instructions that when the Hindenburg returned to Germany, that outer covering had to be replaced, because it was recognized to be a major fire hazard. Hindenburg was originally supposed to be filled with helium anyway, but it was only U.S. reluctance to sell helium to Nazi Germany that they switched to hydrogen at the last second. So there's a little bit of history clarification. Now, we're coming up on a commercial break. When we come back, I'd like a step-by-step process from solar panel to hydrogen, back to electricity, back to water. Since you worked on fuel cells, I assume that there's an oxygen component coming from somewhere, being stored somewhere, or simply harvested from the air. And I'd like to hear the nuts and bolts details about that when we come back from this next commercial break, okay?
Okay.
All right, so we're coming up on our commercial break right now. When we come back, we'll continue our talk with Michael Strisky and the Hydrogen House Project and actually how it works. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Michael Strisky of the Hydrogen House Project. And I'd like to get into some of the nuts and bolts behind how it works. Now, since you work in fuel cells, I'm presuming that we go from solar energy to electrolysis to separate hydrogen from usually oxygen and water. You store the hydrogen. How do you use it for your house, for your car, and so forth? Michael, are you there? Okay, we seem to have a problem in that we have lost our connection to Michael, or I'm not hearing him, or he's not hearing me. So, okay, all right, well, I'm going to just talk for a little while, and hopefully we'll get our guest back. All right, here we are. So, basically, since he worked in fuel cells, during Apollo, that was a major part of the electrical system on the spacecraft. They had tanks of hydrogen and oxygen, which of course was the source of the explosion on Apollo 13. And the hydrogen and oxygen would be mixed together in a reverse electrolysis process that would generate electricity. Hang on a second. And I have Michael here on my phone. Hi, our control room is trying to get back to you. Okay, I'll tell you what. Dial this number, 877-300-7645, and we'll get you back on the air, okay? 877-300-7645. All right, thank you. All right. He is calling the toll-free. All right. Professional radio. It's almost a laugh after that commercial about dreaming about being a talk show host and millions of listeners and everything. And here we are, basically. I feel like I'm on amateur night over here. Okay. So hopefully Mike will be calling in very, very soon. All right. All right. I'm going to get on to another story about the utilities, because I understand why he ran into resistance. So many of these projects in alternative energy are intended to be failures. To say, oh, well, we tried the wind farms and we tried this and it really didn't work. It didn't pencil out, so we're going to stay with the system that we have right now. And that, okay. So, Michael, are you back on the line?
I'm back.
Okay, good. I don't know what.
Disconnected there, a little technical difficulty.
Yeah, well, we're having a lot of technical difficulties these days. You know, it's those gosh darn oil companies with the wire cutters. They don't want this to get out. All right, so to back up here again, solar power on the roof of the house, and I assume electrolysis to separate hydrogen from oxygen and water, store the hydrogen. What's the mechanism by which you use the hydrogen to power the house? How does Toyota use it to power the car?
Okay, I think the simplest thing is my house works on an energy cycle. So different components do different work different times of the year. So it's not similar to a car. So my house works like this. I make hydrogen when I have long solar days and I have no heating or air conditioning bills, which would be in the spring. So by the second week in June, I'm done making hydrogen for the year. I got 19,000 cubic feet stored. I'm done. So from the second week in June all the way to the last week in September, I'm putting 27 kilowatts back onto the grid and they're paying me for it.
Okay.
So I'm cash positive. The house has geothermal heat and air conditioning. So the air conditioning for the house, I use less than 2 kilowatt hours a day during the summer. So the rest of that gets pumped back to where they're paying me. The house is about neutral from the last week in September to the first week in December. And then I start my heavy duty heating season and the days are the shortest. So I pull off the hydrogen that I had stored from the springtime. I run it through a hydrogen fuel cell,
okay,
which gives me the heat, the electricity, and the water back again. And it runs from 2 to 8 hours to power the house. So whatever the solar doesn't make up, I make up in hydrogen. So basically it starts as water, it ends as water, it uses the power of the sun to do the conversion. There's no wheels to well, and all the energy is generated on site, and it's storable forever.
Okay, and you're just taking the oxygen needed for the reverse electrolysis for the fuel cell, but you're just taking that from the atmosphere.
I'm taking oxygen from the air, yeah.
Okay.
I'm just blowing off. When I make it through the electrolyzer, it's 100% medical grade oxygen that I just vent out to the atmosphere. I have friends come over and we have a oxygen bar party.
Oh boy, you just brought back a memory which I'll share with you offline. Okay, so I was not able to get down to the Hawaii Auto Show and look at this Toyota car, but I'm presuming it's an electric vehicle that's powered with a hydrogen fuel cell.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So they're not just taking a stainless steel engine block and using the hydrogen like gas for internal combustion.
No, you get about, maybe 4 to 8% efficiency out of an IC engine.
Okay.
Most of the energy goes out in heat. When you run it through a fuel cell, you're consuming exactly what is needed. So your efficiency is about 5 times that of a gas engine. So you'll do 70 miles where a car will do 10.
Boy, that's very impressive. This does look like the way of the future.
Well, it's not the way of the future. It's here now. I mean, Toyota has just doubled the amount of output of vehicles that they're putting out. Unlike Who Killed the Electric Car, Toyota is actually selling these vehicles and not leasing them. That's how confident they are. And since they released 5,000 of their patents free to the world, they're saying, we're giving you all the tools, world, to adopt this technology before it's too late. So we have the keys to the cage. I mean, do we have the will to use it? That's a whole other story.
Well, you've convinced me. I mean, if I had the resources to do it, I'd be going that way as well, and going for energy independence from the big utilities, from the government. But I can understand why there was a lot of economic and political pressure against you. In fact, I'm looking at this article that's in the Washington Post, where they're saying 3 years ago, the nation's top utility executives got together at this resort in Colorado to figure out ways to stop this move toward alternative independent energy because it was cutting into their profits. Here in Hawaii,
absolutely.
I've got a gentleman that I've been talking to. He's working on the renovations next door, and one of his businesses is solar. And when it first cranked up in Hawaii and there were tax credits and everything, everybody was putting solar on their roofs. Now nobody can get a permit because the Hawaii Electric Company is saying it's cutting into their profits. They're very generous campaign donors. And we've seen the story time and time again. So we, the people, may be very willing to go along with this, but we have a government that wants to keep us dependent on the big utilities. Okay, Mike, we're going to take another 4-minute break for commercials. Hopefully you will still be here when I get back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're continuing our talk with Michael Strisky of the Hydrogen House Project, and he has a website, hydrogenhouseproject.org. It's currently linked from whatreallyhappened.com, where you can see photographs and read more technical information about what's going on. You know what really amazes me is why Al Gore and all of his carbon Nazis are not over at your place holding a party and saying, this is the solution to human-caused global warming. And maybe it's because their real agenda is carbon carbon taxes and more control of the people. But it does sound to me like you've got an actual working technology demonstrator. This can be used to power homes off the grid, which means for more independent lifestyles, which government doesn't like and large corporate utilities don't like. I remember reading, I think about 2 months ago, that some researchers on solar cells had discovered, apparently by accident, that the fine grid pattern on Blu-ray discs actually made solar cells more efficient by trapping more of the energy inside the cell. It didn't bounce out. And of course, if there were to be a major breakthrough in the efficiency of solar panels, we would definitely be seeing more and more people want to adopt this technology. But as you yourself indicated, there is resistance to this being popularized and being known by the oil companies, by the existing status quo. And so we, the people, may want this kind of technology for our future houses. And like I said, if I had the resources, I'd be building my own right now. It sounds like a wonderful, workable idea. And but the resistance, the political will to do it is not going to come from the people, because I'm sure the people are going to be looking at this very well. It is a government that wants us dependent on them for utilities in order to better control us. So I've been on my soapbox about this long enough here. Why don't you tell us more about what is the future of Hydrogen House? Where's it going from here?
Well, we're already building other hydrogen homes right now. I do celebrity islands around the world, and right now we're at the place where it's a little bit expensive because it's not mass produced. We are where the original cell phones were when there were only a couple of towers and the cell phone was as big as a suitcase. But that technology is rapidly shrinking, and innovations like graphene and vapor deposition for platinum loading on the cells have dramatically dropped the cost, and with inexpensive electrolyzers as well. So I've found all of the keys to make this happen. So if you want to look at where we're going in the next couple of years, we're actually going to be able to see a hydrogen economy. I've been doing this for 30 years, and the big stumbling points were, always where are you getting the hydrogen and how it's being made. So the energy source, solar panels just 6 years ago were, $3.50 to $5 a watt, and now they're 67 cents. So the cost of the renewable equipment has gone down so dramatically that it's less than grid electric, which is why people are putting in solar all over the place. So that moon is aligned. The cost of the equipment has come down, and the need, as the world, goes up to consuming huge amounts of oil. I mean, it takes 7 days for the air in China to get here. The world is right now a very small place, and we have to care what is done in China and India and other places because we all share the same ecosystem. You may not hear the water coming into the ship, but the ship is going down.
Well, I'm in agreement.
We have the technology to fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, real quick question here. Does your prototype hydrogen house generate enough of a hydrogen surplus to also allow you to power a car?
Yes.
Boy, it sounds to me like you've got all the answers.
I have. If you look on my website, I built a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle called the New Jersey Genesis back in 2000. I won the President's Award for the Environment for that particular vehicle, and I won Clean Tech Company of the Year from the Board of Public Utilities. So this stuff was doable, 15 years ago. But not until now has the need ever been so great, with China and India going into the machine age, consuming 10 times the fuel of the United States. So, we're looking at, revolution taking place now. Right now, like you said yourself, they don't want to issue any more solar permits because it's cutting into their bottom line. Germany had all of its, 70% powered by solar, the entire country, solar and wind. They cut in all the feed-in tariffs. So all the people who invested in this thing, they got left behind. So there are a lot of entities that have a lot of money that want to prevent this from happening. They never want the public to have control of the communications, the food, the energy, and the water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And my system gives you most of those already. You got control of the water and you've got control of the energy. Picture what I've done here is basically I'm my own oil refinery, only with no oil.
I like that. That's a good image.
And there's no wheels to well. It starts as water, it ends as water. I don't have to transmit my power through hundreds of miles of electric lines and lose 60% of the power in the transmission because the wires are a big resistor. I mean, when you talk about efficiencies, the grid is terribly inefficient because all those line losses to get to your house. If you generate your own electricity or you have microgrids where you share it with your neighbors, it's far more efficient.
And it's also, if everybody's providing their own power, there's no central power plant to be the victim of a terrorist attack or a drone strike in times of war. You've convinced me.
Or no nuclear explosion or Fukushima.
Yeah, Abby, very much on that one. It's my
belief that energy should be free to everyone. We should be just installing equipment, and we should be maintaining it, and we should be building it. Energy should be free.
Well, there has to be a reasonable cost for the setup and maintenance, and parts are going to wear out and everything. So it's not free, but it certainly strikes me as far less expensive and costly than our present system. One of my favorite science fiction writers is a guy named Larry Niven, and he wrote a book called Ringworld. And the backstory for this thing was this amazing technological civilization that lost their primary method of energy creation. And instead of trying to deal with that and come up with an alternative, the very rich and the very powerful simply used up what was left of the stored energy to support their lifestyles until the system came down. And I mention that because we're looking at a parallel right now. We know that oil in the earth is finite. Yes, there are biological processes that are producing more of it, but it's way too deep. And the earth can be filled with oil, but if it costs more than a barrel's worth of oil energy to get a barrel of oil to the surface, the party is over no matter how much is really down there. And we should be, as you are doing, making these transitions now so that when the oil does become prohibitively expensive or costing too much in terms of war, that we're ready to make the switch over and not wait until the oil has run out and shut down and then say, oh my goodness, we need to start building this now, and not have the energy resources with which to build this new system. So it is what you're doing is amazing. It's fascinating. And you should be getting a lot more corporate media coverage about this. Because this isn't some blue sky theoretical exercise. You've got the thing actually working and proving that it can in fact work. Yeah. No, you've got the whole thing running, and it's a wonderful technology demonstrator. I'd sure love to see one of those things being built out here in Hawaii, because, we get so much sun and everything. And
that's a perfect place.
When I win Powerball, I'm going to build one. It sounds to me like a fun project to do, and it does need to get out there. We're coming up on our last commercial break of the show here, and if you don't mind, I'd like to keep you for the last segment of the program so we can just sort of, we're just going to talk about it. It's this wonderful thing that you've accomplished, okay? All righty, so we're going to take a 4-minute commercial break. We're going to finish up the show with Michael Strisky and the Hydrogen House, because I had doubts before. I don't anymore. He's convinced me that this is definitely the future. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today, and we're still talking with Michael Strisky of the Hydrogen House Project. Their website is hydrogenhouseproject.org. A lot of good information there. And yes, when I invited you to be on the show, I had some doubts about this because we're always hearing about all this new wonderful technology that's coming along. But you've convinced me. You've solved all the major pieces of the puzzle, and from here on out, I'm sure there'll be refinement, improvement, and lower costs and better output and everything. But it does sound like this is something that could very well be the solution. As you mentioned, you're already building these houses on these remote islands that are too far away from the utilities. But there's going to be tremendous economic and political pressure against people creating this kind of a house, and there's going to have to be enough Americans standing up and saying, wait a minute, we have a right to live our lives without being plugged into giant corporations, because dependency is slavery, and we've had way too much of that. So we got about another 8 minutes to go here. Michael, what would you like to share with our listeners? Michael, are you there? Did we lose him again? Okay, and all right. let's see. Michael, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, finally we got him. Okay, we had another little technical glitch here. So I'm not going to repeat everything I already said. Basically, we got about another. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I heard you. Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. All right, so we got about another 8 minutes here. And Michael, what else do you think it's important for our listeners to hear?
I think the listeners need to go to my website and check out the things that I've done and how everything works. It's all on there. All the videos are there, so they can learn about the technology. There's also products that we're selling commercially. So I have a jewel box. I have hydrogen golf carts, lawnmowers. I have emergency and disaster relief equipment. So all of this stuff is already packaged. It's for sale, and it fits everybody's price range. We also have cell phone chargers, laptop and iPad chargers, as well as flexible solar panels and solar systems that basically need no installation. You throw them on the ground and you plug it into your wall. They're called the FTU systems. But we have the technology. It's just the will to use it. And once people know that this technology is real and start to demand it, it's going to be impossible for them to stop it. And that's been the whole goal of the Hydrogen House Project, is to educate the next generation coming up so that we won't repeat the same mistakes that this generation did. We got into this mess through technology, and technology will get us out. Everything that's demonstrated on my site is not science, is not pie in the sky. It's real. And, every manned mission since Apollo has used this technology to provide the astronauts with their drinking water, their heat, and their electricity. So everything about what I do is stuff that can be used today, that works today. I'm not interested in stuff that's theoretical for tomorrow. Until it's real, I'm not interested in integrating it. And that's my expertise in life, is to put all the pieces together and build the machines. And since energy is so universal and it has such a detrimental impact, we can't dig up millions of years of carbon stored in the ground, throw it up in the air, and say it doesn't do anything. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. To say there's no such thing as global warming is sticking your head in the sand.
Well, on that one point, you and I might disagree, but I also agree that throwing up a lot of pollutants in the air is a bad thing. And technology like this can definitely undo that damage. So you mentioned before, Toyota has come out with this new hydrogen-powered car, and they have basically declared the patents they originally developed for it, they basically dumped into the public domain saying, go ahead, help yourself, make this work.
Yep. Toyota, like I said, knows what Fukushima is. They know what batteries do to the environment. They leave scorched earth. It's about preserving your way of life. And if we don't fix the problem we've created, when I was growing up, there was no such thing as childhood asthma. We're poisoning and fouling our nest for no reason. The big nuclear bomb in the sky is going to provide us with all of this energy. All we have to do is capture it and store it. The problem with batteries is they're bad in 5 or 6 years. So you can't, and it creates more business. And they're interested in tax money. You can't tax free. That's the problem.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a big objection coming from Washington D.C. is, they're trying to tax carbon and tax this and tax that, and if people are living all on their own, how do you tax something that people are providing for themselves? I'm sure they'll come up with some inventive way to justify it, but that is the real problem.
And that's where revolution comes in, because, when you start to attack certain inalienable rights that are granted under the Constitution, you're looking at, water that falls from the sky, you're looking at the sun that shines on your property. When they start taxing those, I think they're going to cross a line, just like taking people's guns away.
There are already states in this country where you're not allowed to catch water on your property that falls from the sky. If you're collecting water in a rain barrel or from the downspouts, you can be fined for that. And so I would not be surprised at all for some tax-happy nutcase in the government to say, well, that's, the government owns the sun and the sunlight, and you're not allowed to use it unless you pay us a tax. And I'm sure that'll seriously be proposed. But you're right. We have certain rights recognized by the Bill of Rights, not granted, recognized. And the more the government tries to take those away, the angrier people are getting. Now, I'm opposed to any kind of violence. I'd like to avoid it. But in this constant historical battle between the rulers trying to rule the masses, every once in a while a technological breakthrough comes along that seriously redistributes power. Gutenberg's movable type printing, radio, telegraph, computers, laptop, the internet, and now this hydrogen power concept. And it's very solid physics, and it did work on Apollo. I can't think of any part of it that really does represent any kind of a toxic waste issue. Virtually everything that you're building your system out of can be recycled. And, most of it, it may get old, but eventually those are materials that can, in fact, be recycled.
It leaves the world cleaner than it starts.
Well, that's a good thing.
Look at it this way. You start with sunlight, you split water. So now you're taking and you're putting pure oxygen into the atmosphere. Okay? You're storing the hydrogen in the tank. When you go to use it again, you combine it with oxygen in the air and you create God water. You're combining pure hydrogen and pure oxygen together, and that goes back in to make more hydrogen again. So it's a closed loop system. So truly the only thing that gets used in the system is the photons. And, if we stop having sunlight, we're all dead. We got bigger problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Just an idea occurred to me, and this is coming out of left field here. Does the water going into the electrolysis system have to be absolutely pure?
It does. We run it through a deionizing process and reverse osmosis, but you only have to do it once. Once you've done it, the fuel cell makes deionized water.
Okay.
So,
I was just wondering if there might be some way to alter the technology so that you didn't have to use fresh water, because that's coming up short in a lot of parts of the world right now. And
if you look on my website, I've created something called the Hydra Unit, where we have a technology called ultrafiltration. So we basically filter the water where we can use any surface water in the U.S. So any river, lake, stream, or pond, we can make food-grade water out of it with only 100 watts of power, not 7 kilowatts like RO and DI. So there are technologies out there that can purify water very inexpensively. The trick is not to let any fresh water, back into the ocean, because once you've done that, it's going to take you 7 times the energy to clean it.
Okay, so your system doesn't work with salt water. Yeah. Okay.
The system doesn't work with salt water. I mean, I would like it to work with salt water, but we've got to work with the platforms that are in front of us.
No, I understand, and that was not a criticism of what you've done. It was just my fevered brain coming up with another possible advantage to this. Not that it really needs it. We're coming up here to the end of the show, and once again, this has been Michael Strisky of the Hydrogen House Project, and the supporter who called in and recommended you as a guest. Thank you very much for that, because this was very, very interesting here. Once again, hydrogenhouseproject.org. And Michael, I look forward to having you back on the show at some point in the future. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All righty. We're going to let Michael go here. The music is playing. It's time for me to get out of here and get some animation work done, pay a few bills. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices, share what you know with who you know, tell everybody you know about Genesis Communication and whatreallyhappened.com. We need your support to bring about positive change. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.